Well, with the 8.1.0 patch, the Knight got a rework with multiple changes to his base kit mechanics, guards, and add-ons for a total of about 30 changes. Now I'm going to explain each change and whether it's good for the Knight or game health as a whole, which means that we have a lot of material to cover. As always, there will be timestamps if you are interested in skipping to a particular change, but now let's get into reviewing the Knight rework, starting with guard detection. So I think the change that most people who play Knight were looking forward to was changing the base kit guard detection, particularly for Carnifex and Assassin. Because previously the detection range was so low that survivors could easily escape detection, which essentially forced the Knight to bring the add-on Map of the Realm in order for their killer power to be viable. And this rework has made some significant changes to how guard detection works, but before we can analyze the effects of these changes, we need to briefly cover how guard detection works in general. And for that, there are just 3 simple things you need to know. First, survivors run at a speed of 4 meters per second. Next, guards take 1.5 seconds to materialize, and finally, guard detection starts off at 2 meters and then it grows to the guard's max range over the course of a second. So that means that it actually takes a guard 2.5 seconds before it becomes fully active, which gives survivors the opportunity to run 10 meters before being detected. And with a detection range of 8 meters, Carnifex and Assassin basically had no chance to detect survivors in the past. Now to illustrate this point, I've made some diagrams. So imagine that a guard gets summoned at the center of these axes, and after 1.5 seconds, they materialize and they have an initial detection range of 2 meters, and that expands over the course of 1 second to reach the guard's full detection radius. Now let's add a white dot to represent a survivor's position relative to where the guard is summoned, and we'll give the survivor a dotted circle to represent how far they are able to run before the guard is fully active. You can see here that no matter where the survivor is when the guard is summoned, there's always somewhere they can run in order to get out of the detection zone. And this diagram is representative of the old detection circumstances, which is why Carnifex and Assassin were so bad at detection. Survivors could run further than the detection range before the guard became fully active. So now let's see whether these changes in the rework fix this issue. So the first big change we have is increasing the base kit detection radius for all of the guards by 2 meters. So this diagram would change from this to this. Obviously, increasing the radius is going to be an improvement. In fact, the total area covered by this detection range for Carnifex and Assassin is now 50% larger than what it used to be. However, the detection radius now equals the distance that survivors can run. That means unless you place the guard exactly on the survivor's location, they can still escape. So when I first heard about these changes, I was really disappointed that the root of this problem still existed. However, Behavior made another change that wasn't even included in the patch notes that changes everything about this detection. The time it takes for a guard to expand its detection radius has actually been reduced from 1 second to half a second now. So that means that instead of taking 2.5 seconds to fully activate, a guard now only takes 2 seconds. And that means that survivors don't have as much time to run away, which means that instead of being able to run 10 meters away from a guard, a survivor can now only run 8 meters. So the survivor's range has been decreased from this to this, which means that they are no longer guaranteed safety against a Carnifex and Assassin. In fact, as long as the Knight manages to place their guard within 2 meters of the survivor's location, and we'll represent that with the red circle, the survivor cannot simply run to safety. So with all this in mind, I do think that the rework fixed the Knight's detection, but it's only thanks to this undocumented change that makes the guard activate more quickly. Now, in exchange for increasing the base detection by 2 meters, the bonus from Map of the Realm has also been decreased by 2 meters, and I'll be covering the implications of that when we go to the add-on section of this video, but I just want to mention that this means that Map of the Realm is as good as it was before. The only change is how good it is relative to base kit conditions now. Make no mistake though, I think that Map of the Realm is still the Knight's strongest add-on, and we will talk about why later. The last change Behavior made affecting the guard's detection is the Knight is now forced to draw a patrol path of 10 meters before you're able to summon your guard to detect survivors. And at first I was really worried that this change would stop Knights from being able to immediately summon the Carnifex to break pallets in the middle of a chase, but I'm happy to say that that is not at all affected by this rework. Knights can still command orders without drawing a patrol path, they're just not able to summon guards to detect. So those concerns aside, how does this change of drawing a patrol path affect the knight? Well, by default, the knight can draw his patrol paths at a speed of 13.8 meters per second, which means to reach the 10 meter requirement, it's going to take 0.725 seconds before you're able to summon a guard. And in that time, survivors are able to run 2.9 meters, which when added to the 8 meters they can run before your guard fully activates, gives survivors about 11 meters of distance that they can make while you're using your power. So I can't say I'm a fan of this change. I think it makes Knight feel very clunky to use since the turning radius is so low on the patrol paths. Survivors get a huge advantage just by simply changing direction. But more importantly, it makes shutting down loops difficult since any guard that you summon lets the survivor gain 2.9 meters, which translates to about 4.8 seconds added to the chase, because that's how long it takes for you to catch up. On the flip side, another change that's been introduced is the ability for the Knight to cancel a patrol path. So maybe this could allow for some mind games and baiting survivors to change course when you're not actually going to summon a guard. And in that case, I think that this is a healthy change for the Knight, especially because previously, if you accidentally used your power, you would have to summon the guard at your feet, immediately hit them to stop their patrol, and then wait for the cooldown before you could summon your next guard. It's much better now to just be able to cancel your power. So that covers all of the changes that have been made to guard detection. Overall, I think Behavior made mostly good changes to the base kit detection, and finally makes the Knight's killer power functional, even without having to rely on his add-ons. Now, while modifying guard detection was probably the change that most people have been requesting for the Knight, these next changes are actually what makes this update truly a rework, because they significantly changed the playstyle of the Knight. And that brings us to guard cycling. So instead of being locked into a set cycle of guards that went from Carnifex to Assassin to Jailer every time, the Knight is now able to freely choose which guard to summon next. So this rework comes with quite a few changes to balance the new Knight power, and some of these changes were further refined in a later patch of 8.2.0. So the first change we'll talk about is that the Knight's power is no longer shared between the guards. Instead, each guard is a separate individual. Whereas the previous power had a shared cooldown after every guard was done with their task, now the Knight can summon a guard even while another is active. Now, this does not mean that the Knight can have two guards patrolling simultaneously, because if you summon a guard while one is active, it will cause the first guard to disappear. The only exception is if the first guard is completing an order, like breaking a pallet or generator, they're not booted out of that mid-action. But considering that previously Knights would have to wait for the first guard to disappear, and then wait for a 10-second cooldown before they could summon the next guard, this change could give the Knight quite a bit more adaptability going forward. Now, to account for the fact that the Knight's killer power has no shared cooldown, each of the guards now has a cooldown of their own. The Carnifex has a cooldown of 20 seconds, Assassin has a cooldown of 30 seconds, and Jailer has a cooldown of 25 seconds. You can also reduce these cooldowns to 10 seconds if you hit your guard with an M1 to end their patrol prematurely, just like you could in the past. So I think that this is a great change to the Knight. It allows players to be more flexible in their game plan during the match, but I also think it opens up more opportunities for Knights to develop a unique playstyle. And I think that will be reflected in Knights bringing different builds, which should allow for a lot more variability between Knight players than we had before. And now for the last big category of Knight changes, guards are going to be more lethal because there have been a number of updates for guard hunting. And just to be clear, a hunt is what happens when a guard has detected and is chasing a survivor, and there are a few ways that this has been changed. The first change is that hunt durations for Carnifex and Jailer have been swapped. So Carnifex used to hunt for 24 seconds, he now hunts for 12, and Jailer, who used to hunt for 12 seconds, now hunts for 24. Now, if you've seen my breakdown of which Knight Guard is best, you know that I used to think that the Jailer was absolute garbage, because even though he has great detection, his hunting ability was so bad, he couldn't get any value out of actually detecting a survivor. But now that he has a longer hunt duration, I think he definitely has some value now, and I'll have to reevaluate where each of the guards stands. Of course, the trade-off for this is that Carnifex is now the useless one at hunting, but he already had a low detection range, and he's mostly used for breaking pallets anyway. So this is one change I'm really happy about because I think it balances out the guards and gives each of them their own strengths and makes them useful in different situations. The next change is that hunt durations are now extended based on how long the patrol path that you drew was. And to determine that, there are basically 3 patrol path thresholds for distance, which I'll call minimum for paths that are less than 16 meters, mid for paths that are 16 to 25 meters, and max for patrol paths that are longer than 25. So basically, if your patrol path is less than 15 meters, your guard will hunt for its regular duration, but if it's longer, your guard gets a boost to their hunt time. If the path is within the mid threshold, the hunt is 25% longer, and if the path was in the max threshold for distance, the hunt's going to be 50% longer. So in terms of total hunt time, at the middle distance, Carnifex and Assassin will have a hunt duration of 15 seconds instead of 12, and Jailer will have 30 seconds instead of 24. If your patrol path was the max distance, Carnifex and Assassin hunt for 18, and the Jailer hunts for a full 36 seconds. Now, I always like to represent guard hunts in terms of the distance that they're able to gain on survivors during a hunt, because it doesn't really matter how long your guard can chase for if they never actually close the distance and threaten the survivor. So for example, the Carnifex runs at 0.1 meters faster than survivors, so depending on the patrol length, he can close 1.2, 1.5, or 1.8 meters of distance. Not a huge difference between the 3 patrol path lengths, but remember, Carnifex is the worst at hunting now. Now the Jailer, who runs at the same speed as the Carnifex, but does it for twice as long, he's going to be able to close 2.4, 3, and 3.6 meters on a survivor. Now we're starting to see some pretty significant increases, but the master of hunting is the Assassin because he runs at 0.4 meters per second faster than survivors, so he will be able to gain 4.8 meters at short range, 6 meters at middle range, and 7.2 meters at max range, which is pretty huge. So these are some significant buffs to the guard's ability to hit survivors, but there's a final change that balances that a little bit. One of the best plays that a knight can do is hit a survivor at the same time as their guard for a double hit that can insta-down a healthy survivor. So a lot of times, knights would run behind a survivor, holding off on hitting them so they could set up a double hit, and that would be even easier to do now with longer hunt times. However, behavior has decided to make double hitting more difficult by making the hunt duration decrease 3 times faster while the knight is within 8 meters of their hunting guard. What this means is that if you are too close to a hunting guard, like trying to flank a survivor in a loop, the hunt is going to last for 1/3 of the time while you're within that range. So based on your proximity, you can think of Carnifex and Assassin of having a maximum hunt time of 12, 15, or 18 seconds based on patrol path length, and a minimum of 4, 5, and 6, 1/3 of the time. And Jailer would be double that, so a maximum of 24, 30, 36 second chases, and a minimum of 8, 10, or 12 if you are too close. Now, I'll admit double hitting survivors is one of my favorite things to do in DBD, so I can't say I'm happy about this change for purely selfish reasons, but I do admit that it's probably better for the health of the game. So overall, I think that these hunt duration changes are really good. They either significantly buff the guards or promote healthier gameplay, so I don't have any real issues with these changes. And now there are a few little changes remaining to the Knight's base kit. I don't think that these will be very impactful, so I'm just going to rapid fire through the list, but I do think it's important to know that these changes did occur. First up, we have another change based on patrol path length that increases the time it takes a guard's banner to spawn. So this uses the same patrol path thresholds that the hunt duration bonuses use. Minimum paths give no bonus, mid paths make the banners take an extra 50% to spawn, and max length doubles the time to spawn. The banner spawn time is also switched between Carnifex and Jailer, so for the Carnifex and Assassin, the banner can be picked up after 5, 7.5, or 10 seconds, depending on the patrol path, and the Jailers can be picked up after 10, 15, or 20 seconds. And this is another nice little buff to the guards and another incentive to use them at long range, since it gives you more time to run toward the survivor before they can end the hunt by picking up the flag. The next minor change is that guards now break things faster by default. Assassin and Jailer used to do orders in 6 seconds, now it takes 5, and Carnifex used to do orders in 2 seconds, now it takes 1.8, so there's not really any practical difference for Carnifex. However, for Assassin and Jailer, this is a nerf. I've talked about this before in reference to the add-on Pillaged Mead, but the Knight wants orders to take longer because it lets you block generators for a longer time. Breaking pallets in 5 seconds is still too long to play around effectively, so this change doesn't really help in terms of chasing, but what it does do is reduces the amount of time that you can block generators by 16%. So this is a straight up nerf, and I don't know why. Maybe it was done to discourage 3-genning Knights, but based on some other changes that we'll get to, I really don't think Behavior had that in mind. Another change is that the camera push distance when entering patrol path has been decreased, and I'll be honest, I don't exactly know what this means, but I'm guessing it has to do with field of view when using your power. Personally, I haven't really noticed any impact of the change, but I assume it's an accessibility or quality of life change, so no complaints from me. And our final Knight base kit change is that guard detection has been changed to reduce being detected through walls. I assume this is referring to bugs where survivors would be detected even without line of sight to the guard, in which case this is a great change because survivors should be rewarded for being able to avoid detection through the environment. And that brings us to the end of all of the base kit changes to the Knight. So now let's move on to the add-ons where 14, which is 70% of them, have been tweaked or reworked. I'll be going over the changes and initial impressions here, but after this I'll be making a new tier list ranking all of the add-ons in relation to each other in a future video. For now, let's start with the add-ons that have been tweaked. And first up is Map of the Realm, which we touched on in the detection analysis. The added detection range from this perk is being decreased from 4 meters to 2 meters, and although that sounds like a nerf, it's really just compensating for the base kit detection increase of 2 meters. So in essence, this add-on will play exactly as it did before. I still think that this is the strongest Knight add-on because it makes your detection 2.5 times better, but that's its own analysis video that I'll also be releasing after this. The next add-on that was tweaked is Pillaged Mead. Now, this decreases guard orders by 10% now, which used to be 15%. And this was also changed to account for the base kit change where the order times were reduced. So previously, if you brought Pillaged Mead, Assassin and Jailer would complete orders in 5.1 seconds. Now, if you bring Pillaged Mead on top of the changes, it will reduce order times to 4.5 seconds. Now, Carnifex does order so fast that the change is negligible. As for Assassin and Jailer, as I've said before, lowering order times hurts the Knight because you lower the time that you can block generators, but you still can't walk through pallets. So this add-on is detrimental and even more so than it was before. Then we have Grim Iron Mask, which has just increased the blindness duration that it gives from 60 seconds to 75. So it's an improvement, but I don't think this is going to cause Knights to use it any more or less. Next up, we have Ironworker's Tongs. This causes a survivor to become oblivious after escaping a hunt, which means they can't hear your tear radius, and the tweak has been that the effect is increased to 60 seconds instead of 20. So it now lasts long enough to perhaps take advantage of the oblivious effect, but I still don't think it's good enough for people to run it. Another tweak is increasing the aura reading duration from Flint and Steel from 5 seconds to 8 seconds. Again, it's a nice change, but the limitations of only being able to see auras around drop pallets is still the main downside of the add-on, so I don't think tweaking this is going to change its usefulness. And the final tweaked add-on is the Iridescent Company banner, which now blocks vault locations for 25 seconds instead of 15. And this change might actually be enough to bump it up a few places in the ranking, but it still requires a lot of predicting and forethought, which might discourage people from using it still. Now, moving on to the add-ons that got completely reworked. Let's start with Battle Axe Head, Treated Blade, and Cold Steel Manacles. Previously, these add-ons let you use their corresponding guard twice in a row, but now that the guards have their own individual cooldowns, these add-ons now reduce the cooldown for their specific guard by 20%. So Carnifex has a 20-second cooldown that will be reduced to 16 seconds with Battle Axe Head. Treated Blade reduces Assassin's cooldown from 30 to 24 seconds, and Cold Steel Manacles reduces Jailer cooldown from 25 seconds to 20. And I think that this is a nice adaptation to the add-ons to fit the new guard mechanics, and I think they could let Knight players develop new playstyles that focus on a particular guard. So I think there are a lot of fun things you can do with this. Next up for reworks, we have Broken Hilt and Chainmail Fragment. So previously, these add-ons allowed your guards to inflict Mangled and Hemorrhage, respectively, when your guard hit a survivor. Now, Chainmail Fragment is completely gone, and Broken Hilt inflicts both Mangled and Hemorrhage. So I think that's a decent change, since an add-on that only makes survivors drop more blood is pretty useless. So it should be nice to basically give your guard Sloppy Butcher. Now, in place of Chainmail Fragment, we now have an add-on called Sharpened Mount, and this add-on increases the spawn duration of guard standards by 15%. Remember, these spawn times are also affected by patrol length, so with Sharpened Mount, Carnifex and Assassin banners will take 5.75, 8.6, or 11.5 seconds, depending on patrol path length, while Jailers would take 11.5, 17.25, or 23 seconds to spawn. So basically, this is an add-on that just makes it harder for survivors to get out of hunts via grabbing the standard, which isn't a common occurrence anyway, so I think there are much better and more consistent add-ons to use, and I don't think that Sharpened Mount will see much play. The next add-on rework is for Town Watch's Torch, and this is an add-on that used to be terrible for reasons that would take too long to get into here. But after the rework, it now grants the Knight undetectable while a guard is actively hunting a survivor. And I think this is probably the best rework for an add-on in this patch because it's a decent effect that also changes the Knight's playstyle, which I think is a key factor in making interesting add-ons. It incentivizes the Knight to pursue 2 targets at once, have a guard chase a survivor while you use your undetectable status to catch other survivors off guard. It also works particularly well with Jailer, who has the longest hunt times, and previously the Jailer had very few uses, so suffice to say I'm very happy with this change, especially considering what Town Watch's Torch used to be. Another add-on that got reworked is Blacksmith's Hammer. It used to make survivors exhausted when they escaped a hunt, but now it causes guards to inflict the Broken status for 60 seconds when they hit a survivor. So I think this is a buff to Blacksmith's Hammer, and I can see people running it regularly with dried horse meat to have an aggressive build focused on guards getting as many hits as possible and keeping survivors injured. Next, we have the purple add-ons Healing Poultice and Jailer's Chimes, which affect Assassin and Jailer respectively. Jailer's Chimes is just the new name for what used to be Lightweight Greaves, and previously, Healing Poultice would make survivors scream, which I thought was pretty good, and Jailer's Chimes increased the Knight's movement speed, which I thought was not. Now, they both have similar effects in line with the purple add-on for Carnifex, Flint and Steel, where summoning the respective guards reveal survivor auras. Healing Poultice reveals survivors within 8 meters of where the survivor is summoned, and Jailer's Chimes reveal survivors who cross the Jailer's patrol path, while Flint and Steel still reveals survivors next to down pallets, just like it did before. So I'm largely fine with these changes, especially for the Jailer's Chimes. I think it adds some good information and synergizes well with Jailer's long patrol times. The change to Healing Poultice is much less significant because it basically switches out Screaming for aura reading, so you're still getting information either way. There are pros and cons for each, but I think it evens out to be a pretty neutral change. And finally, we have arrived at the last change in this whole rework, which is changing the iridescent add-on Knight's Contract. So this perk used to expose survivors every 4 guards you spawned. Now it makes guards stay for 8 seconds after they perform an order. And honestly, I think this might be the worst change in the entire patch, because the only use I can think of having this effect is to 3-gen, which I think should be actively discouraged. Don't get me wrong, I think there are too many exposed effects in the game already, but to replace that effect with one that promotes one of the most unhealthy playstyles baffles me. This is a really bad change, and unless you plan to 3-gen from the time that you make your loadout, it's also a really bad effect. And that brings us to the end of the Knight rework changes. Overall, I'm very happy with most of the changes Behavior made. I think there are only 2 that I think are really bad for the game. And now I just want to say that if you've stuck around this long, I want to thank you so much for the support. And if you're interested in learning more about the Knight, my next videos will be analyzing which guard is best now, ranking each of the guard's new add-ons, and also diving in deeper to how guard detection currently works. So until then, I wish you all the best and thank you for watching. Sincerely.